Ken Seals, the Ultra Minute. Welcome to the Running Lawn podcast.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Fran. And Fran's okay, right? I hear everyone else calling you Fran, so I've always
It
just called you
is.
Francesco. Okay, cool.
Yeah, I think that's what my American friends call me.
Okay,
So, yeah, totally
cool,
fine with me. Thanks.
cool,
How are you doing?
good. Yeah, it was a delight to get the DM for the invite. So excited to be here and to chat with you.
Thanks. Yeah, we've obviously exchanged some messages even before for your project, the Ultra Minute, which we'll talk about in a second. Um, Yeah, I think you're a very interesting profile to have on the podcast. I like to reflect on the state of the sport from a media perspective sometimes, and you are the perfect person to do that. So, yeah, first, just a general question to introduce yourself and share a little bit of your background and how you got into trail and ultra running, of course.
Yeah. Um, so I started the Ultraman. Maybe we'll start there. Last summer, last July, I was actually watching Hard Rock, just the live stream, and saw Ludo winning at 48. I think he was turning 49 like the next day or something like that. And I was writing a newsletter at the time. It's called Everyday Empires, and it's about people starting businesses of their own. So I was familiar with the sort of format of a newsletter. Um, but seeing Ludo win at 49, set a course record, I've sort of always been, maybe you'd call it like a hobbyist trail runner or something like a lifestyle trail runner, not a
Yeah.
trail racer, but someone who runs trails regularly and has done so for 20 years or so. And I've loosely followed the sport of trail running and have sort of seen it growing over the years. And I've always sort of put on the back burner this idea of getting into trail racing myself and kind of dabbling and trying that. So I'm 39, watching Ludo at 49, and sort of having this realization like, wait, I still maybe have a decade if everything goes perfectly where I could actually try my hand at trail racing and maybe for me be competitive for me. Obviously, I'm not aspiring to be a Ludo, but to just go out there and maybe still have some of my fastest days ahead of me if I were to actually put my mind to it. So that sort of sparked this idea of wanting to commit more of my energy to trail racing. And as a fan of the sport, at that point, I sort of started to invest more of my time just even following the sport. And as a dad of, at the time, a dad of two young kids, now a dad of three young boys. We have now a 2 month old in addition to a 3 year old and a 4 year old. I don't have a ton of spare time. And to follow the sport, I
Can
found that I
imagine.
was on Instagram a lot and listening to a lot of podcasts. And I just had this thought like, it'd be really cool. I also, as a newsletter writer, I was like, it'd be cool if I had a newsletter where once a week I could get a quick download on what's happening in the sport. And I didn't see that available. So I was like, well, I'll try making it myself. So that's sort of how it came to be. The ironic bit is now I spend more time than ever on Instagram and
Exactly.
podcasts,
That's
but
the
I'm
issue.
sort of happy to take that for everyone else, especially if I can grow the Ultra Minute into something worthwhile. So it's been a really fun journey, especially connecting with people like you. And actually, I've told a few people this, but I think you're one of my first subscribers, maybe like first 20 subscribers or something like that.
Oh, that's
Just
cool.
because you're also active on Substack, and I was sort of Substack first with
Yeah,
the Ultra Minute. So if I think for the first 4 months or something, I didn't even have an Instagram profile for it. I just posted on Substack, and that worked pretty well. And then around November, I believe, of last year, decided to start posting on Instagram. And now that's the growth there is sort of outpacing the growth on Substack. But I think you get a deeper connection with readers through Substack than you do um, through Instagram. But anyway, we can get into that more too. I'm kind of curious to hear your experience with Substack as well. But that's sort of the genesis of the Ultra Minute. And then if it's interesting to you, I can kind of share more about my introduction to the sport.
You, I think you froze.
Is it my connection? Yeah.
I don't know.
Let's see.
Um,
I usually have a really good connection. Let's try.
Maybe it's mine. Hang on a second.
I was just going to do a speed test really quickly.
Okay.
Oh yeah, I'm getting really good
Okay.
good download and stuff. Did you lose me during that?
Just a second. Yeah, mine is. Well, okay.
You
No,
look
no
clear
worries.
now. It
Hopefully.
was really blurry for me, but now you look clear.
Okay. Let's try. Sorry.
I think with Riverside it captures both parties too, so
Okay.
I think the recording should
Yeah.
be okay.
Yeah. Okay. Awesome. Um. Yeah, I actually don't remember when I found you on Substack, but I feel like we are kind of pioneers on that platform, if that's the right word.
Yeah, it's starting to take
I
off.
think now there is this new wave of media creators, athletes, and people coming to Substack because many of them feel quite disappointed with Instagram and other social media, and they enjoy long form content. They like to read and to, on Substack there is the possibility to expand way more than what Instagram allows. So it's a great platform for people who like to actually take their time and read and learn, which I also like, and I also like writing. So yeah, I don't remember when I signed up to Substack, but it was probably a couple of years ago. Yeah, so the Ultra Minute is your project, and we can say it's an aggregation of Instagram posts, newsletters, podcasts, articles, and just anything that catches your attention that is happening within the trail and ultra running space. You pointed out the funny thing is that you started this newsletter to solve a problem that you found within the sport as a fan, that it was like the scrolling and the time you were spending on social media to do your research and to learn and to just stay updated with the sport. It turns out that writing a newsletter requires a lot of research, and you end up spending maybe way more time than before. How have you come to terms with that?
It's been challenging. So my first job is stay-at-home dad. So,
Yeah.
I've had I guess 20-year career in tech. And about 2 years ago now, actually, my most recent role came to a natural conclusion doing high growth early stage startups. Typically, they either fail or have some sort of acquisition. This one was like the middle of the road, like kind of in between for that. But anyway, for me, it was a natural moment to pause, take a step back. And so far at that point, we hadn't had to get childcare for our kids. We'd been very fortunate. Between my wife and I, we were able to take care of them. And then at this point, she was back full time at her job, and she's a corporate attorney. So as well as I was doing, she was doing better in terms of providing for the family. So, and she also works from home. So it made sense for me to sort of take over duties with the kids. And then with my background in startups, and in particular, taking an idea 0 to 1, sort of, I'd made a career out of working with founders to go from, hey, I have an idea, to actually making that a real thing, building a product, launching it, and growing the company. So the idea was I can be a stay-at-home dad, and if I have spare time, I can work on a project that has potential. So for the first several months, I just kicked around ideas, and spent time with our kids, and then was working on the newsletter Everyday Empires as a way to talk to people who'd built businesses that prioritized their lifestyle versus just growth for growth cost, or the reason of growth, but more businesses that enable them to live the life they want to live, right? So coming from a high growth startup world, I was kind of burnt out on this idea of like raising venture capital, building this massive team, and I was really enamored by people who were working less hours but still a meaningful life and able to live where they wanted and how they wanted. So I was just sort of researching that, and that's kind of how I came to the idea of newsletters. And so I sort of started to dive deep into the world of newsletters because the format struck me as having the potential to build a business that enabled me to live the type of life I wanted, where I could be spending more time with my family and live where I wanted to. So I sort of had that lens through which I was looking through the world, which is kind of why I think I came across the idea for the Ultra Minute. And then as it started to gain traction, naturally, I'm the type of person that just will put all of my energy into something. And that's worked really well for me in my career. But my first job is still being a stay-at-home dad. So I definitely, I hit a tipping point, and I'm sure I struck more than one nerve with my wife. Just, I was burning the candle on both ends, trying to keep up with everything. And I think for a few weeks there, maybe even a month, I was probably doing like 60 hours a week on the Ultra Minute at least. And actually, I think it kind of hit ahead the week that I messaged you about canyons, because for that race in particular, and this also I realized isn't great for athletes. Like I sent you maybe 4 or 5 questions, I think, and then you had to take the time to answer them, which thank you for doing that. That your answers were amazing. But then I was only utilizing like maybe 1 or 2 quotes from athletes, and only from a couple of athletes, but I would put together thoughtful questions for like 10 athletes for every race. And I realized I was putting like 10 to 15 hours just into the questions and going back and forth with athletes, plus having to keep up with the sport. That was like another 10 to 20 hours. And then also compiling and writing was like another 10 hours or so. And so I was just like, okay, this isn't sustainable. And also my newsletter was getting longer and longer. It went from like an 8-minute read to like a 16-minute read. And so I was like, okay, I'm going to experiment with just not doing that, but trying to keep up with the sport. Maybe I spend like 30 minutes to an hour a day checking Instagram, listening to podcasts, stuff like that. And then instead of messaging a bunch of athletes, maybe I'll just send 1 question to 1 or 2 athletes. And so that's sort of what I've been doing since Canyons. And that has felt much better. I could feel myself approaching burnout really quickly with the previous path. And it's most important, I think, to be consistent and to do something that I can do sustainably for a long period of time if this is going to be a successful project. So that was a nice reset. So I'm definitely still coping with how to manage the time investment, but I would say since then I'm probably doing more like 20 hours a week, which is and that's all in trying to follow the sport and also writing it, and it's felt much more manageable.
Of course.
I've also decided to be less committed to a hard deadline. I would start to sort of panic, like, oh, I have to get it out tomorrow, and then I'd be up all night and up early in the morning, and then I wasn't able to be present and really be a great dad and a great husband, let alone try to run myself as someone who aspires to be a better athlete. And so just having that reset was super important, and realizing it doesn't have to go out on Wednesday or Friday, and it can go out 3 days later, and that's fine, and one day, especially right now through the summer months, it's most difficult for me because my 2 oldest boys were in preschool through the school year, from 9 to 1, Tuesdays and Thursdays. So that sort of provided, okay, I have these 2 mornings a week where I can write. and sit down and have focused time. And then we had our newborn in the middle of March. And then our boys also a few weeks ago had their last day of school until September. So these months are trickier for sure. I've been doing a lot of the writing in the middle of the night. So like our newborn will wake up at like 3 a.m. and my wife feeds him and I'll sit there in bed and write for an hour until he goes back to sleep. And then I'll usually get up again a couple hours later and come into our office and write for an hour or so until our older boys wake up. But then once they're up, it's like, forget it. You're not going to get any focus work done for the rest of the day. So it's definitely an ongoing learning experience.
Of course.
Sort of always evolving. But it's been a fun challenge.
I feel like you just pointed out all the struggles and the problems that any content creator faces, whether you're trying to, build a YouTube channel or write a newsletter or start a podcast. At some point, you will be facing these kind of issues. And it's very hard to lift these kind of projects off the ground and turn them into something. I think also like one of the differences between what I maybe can define as the American approach and the European approach is that you're very project and business oriented. Like you start a newsletter with the goal to eventually become something bigger, maybe a business or like something that is sustainable, long term from an economic perspective.
Right.
On this side of the pond, people would just do it, in their spare time because they will, of course, assume that nobody's going to pay for the newsletter, for the content. It's very hard to find sponsors. And it's just something that people do in their spare time, which is kind of, for us, maybe disappointing or not the best scenario, but it is what it is. I think it's, and this is one of the things that I wanted to talk about with you. We've seen athletes starting a Substack or a YouTube channel, and this was very clearly expressed in the last newsletter by Matt Walsh, Trail Mix. Not to generate more revenue or to gain more fans or anything like that. It's because they can have their own voice. They're able to expand on things that they care about in a much better way than Instagram or other much quicker social media, TikTok and stuff. But it's very hard to monetize them, basically. It's still very hard. I don't know. What do you think? And how are you planning to go from where you are right now to where you want to be in the future?
Sorry, Fran, I kind of lost you there at the end. See if it clears up. Yeah, I think I've got you back now. I think the question was about monetizing on Substack. Was that the question? I sort of dropped off there. Like,
do you have a plan, or do you have an idea of how to go from where you are right now to where you would like to be in some time?
I have ideas.
I like to make the project sustainable.
I don't have
basically.
Yeah. I'd say the first sort of attempt I'm making is using Substack's built-in monetization, which, if for people who aren't familiar, basically you can opt to pay for a newsletter, or you can also do podcasts on the platform as well. And they give you different sort of paywalls, I guess you could call them, like where you can sort of paywall posts or comments or the chat feature, things like that. And I just launched this a couple of weeks ago, but a very basic paid option where basically it's like a pay to support the project. Currently, as a paid subscriber, you don't actually get anything in addition to the free newsletter. It's just like, hey, I like this project, I want to support it.
Yeah.
And I've thought a lot about what I could provide paid subscribers, but I was really nervous about overcommitting and burning out doing that. And also having no idea how many people would opt to subscribe. I was like, I don't want to overcommit too many extras and have 5 people signed up, and now I'm working an additional 20 hours a week, you know? So I started with the most minimal thing I could offer. This is sort of my, I guess, startup experience speaking, but you always try to start with like, what's the most minimally viable option, and sort of see if you can get any interest or traction. So I just launched with, hey, here's what I have today. I'm going to do the same thing I'm currently doing, but if you want to support the project, you can do that. And I've had some subscribers. I have 10 paid subscribers today. Basically, I got a handful in the launch, and then every issue since then, I've gotten a couple of new paid subscribers. And if that trend were to continue, that actually would be a pretty sustainable trend, I think, long term. At some point, you have to factor in churn, maybe 10%, 15% churn. I'm not sure what that looks like. That's, I think, industry standard. But we'll see. I don't know if that will maintain or not. That just might be a near term thing. But my thinking is I can start to experiment with some additional extras as I have time. So I didn't want to out of the gate say, hey, every paid subscriber is going to get XYZ, because I don't actually know if I can do it or if it will be compelling. It'll just be like a surprise and delight kind of thing. So, for example, I might do like a chat thread just for paid subscribers. I might try like a Q&A with athletes that's just for paid subscribers, or like a mini profile on an athlete that's just for paid subscribers, and just listen to my audience, and kind of go from there. So that's sort of the first approach is, can I leverage Substack's built-in feature set and really lean into their model of having your audience pay for content?
Do you
It
believe
clearly
in?
works for some Substacks,
Yeah.
for many Substacks. I think looking at Substack, I believe financial Substacks and like business related Substacks tend to work best with that model, primarily because if people think they can pay for content that will help them make or save money, they're more likely to pay for it, and or they can have their company write it off. So that's why I believe those types of Substacks perform best.
Yeah.
Will someone pay for ultra running content? Remains to be seen. I think
Exactly. Like, because I think a lot of people just assume it that this content is out for free just because everyone has
right,
been doing it for free
right,
for forever.
right,
So, I mean, the internet is full of free content, and that's the paradox of
for sure.
creators, I guess, because you need time and you need to put in a lot of work to produce this content, but you're not getting anything or much in return.
Yeah. I'd say I'm hopeful that I can go all in on a reader supported model, but I'd say realistically, I think for that to work, it's probably a very long term timeline, and I probably will have to provide quite a few extras for paid subscribers, meaning I'll have to commit a lot more time. I think what's probably more realistic is some sort of hybrid where you're kind of always growing the paid subscriber base while also working with paid sponsorship. Um, I've had a number of brands reaching out. I think brands are seeing Substack as a new channel and they want to get access to that channel. So they're starting to look at who are the Substacks that are kind of up and coming. I'm still weighing how I feel about that and sort of who I want to work with and that sort of thing. But I'd say in terms of a sustainable path forward, it probably is something like that. In terms of a model that's sort of an example for me, I like Mario Fraioli's The Morning Shakeout
Oh yeah,
model, where he has several long-term sponsors, but it's not very invasive and it feels genuine.
that's a great
Fast
example actually.
Women is
Yeah.
another good example, where Allison Wade, she'll have like, I think, 4 or 5 issues at a time that are sponsored by a particular brand. I don't think she does like annual sponsorships the way that Mario
No.
does, but
Yeah.
again, minimally invasive and feels authentic, and both also have reader support. But I think for them, reader support is very much secondary. But also, both were not Substack native.
Yeah.
Like both started far
They
far before
existed way
Substack.
way before Substack.
Yeah, and they've both since migrated to Substack. So I'm interested to see how or if they'll start to leverage the built-in Substack, sort of paid features. I haven't spoken to either about that, but kind of keeping my eye on that. And I think it's an evolving landscape, and everyone's kind of figuring it out. But
For
I'd love
sure.
to be sort of Substack paid first, and maybe like supplement that with strategic paid sponsors that I myself align with and think that my audience would as well. And in terms of a time investment, I think there's extra time that will go into additional content for paid subscribers, but I also think there will be extra time that goes into negotiations with paid sponsorships. So it's like, which is greater and which would I rather spend my time doing and which will pay more for me in the long run. So I don't know. My background with startups is in product, so I very much have like an experimental approach to these sorts of things. So, leading product teams in the past, I would run a dozen experiments in a week, and sort of we would look at the data and kind of go from there. I don't have a lot of quantitative data available to me through Substack just because my numbers aren't high enough to have any sort of like statistical significance. But qualitative data I can look at for sure and sort of say like I'm getting feedback from people when I do this, or it's crickets when I do this, and just kind of go from there. And also just the sort of super skill I think I've learned in startups is cold DMing. It's like sending out cold emails and cold messages. And so I'll do that to readers as well. So I can see in Substack who is most engaged, and then I'll message them from time to time. Hey, what did you think of this? And that way I'm kind of always learning based on what I'm trying. So I plan to do a lot more of that for the paid subscribers in particular to try to learn. And I'll probably start just a paid chat where I also am constantly asking their opinion about what I'm trying and maybe involving them in the creation process.
What are your thoughts on the current media landscape that is covering trail running? I feel like it's much more developed in the US compared to Europe. We don't have an organic voice like you have. You have Free Trail, you have Ironfar that has basically built ultra running into what it is today. You have podcasts like Single Track. You have newsletters like yours. So there is definitely, for the audience, you can get to choose from many different outlets and voices. In Europe, we're not as lucky. There's a language barrier, of course, which is a huge barrier that prevents big projects from developing. But where do you think we are right now? I feel like the storytelling and just how information is put out is still very fragmented, and there are still a lot of independent creators, but not like a strong, relevant voice that is covering the sport as maybe in other sports, basically. And I don't know if we'll ever evolve in that direction. It's I think it's similar for track and field or for road running. Just because it's ultra running is not so easy to stream, to bring on TVs. So maybe the format will always remain fragmented among many media outlets. But what is your thought on the current situation?
I'd say in broad strokes, I think we're going to continue to see this trend of, maybe you call it micro media. Um, and I think that's not necessarily a result of our sport. It's really just the broader macro environment. I think we're seeing it across the board. I just read an article earlier this week, actually, about Substack in particular. And it was basically about how we're in stage 4 of 5 stages with Substack. I'll send it to you after this if you haven't seen it. But basically, it started with people on Substack like were kind of a joke. And then it was like, traditional publications like the New Yorker were like joking about someone's mom starting a Substack, and then they started to link to Substacks, and now the big media empires themselves are trying to start Substacks. And the general theme, though, in my takeaway was having these sort of individual creators is gaining more and more steam. We saw it first with social, and kind of what's happened with social media and video through YouTube. I think we're now seeing with the written format as well, through Substack. And so if you think about how that worked, maybe with YouTube in particular, it's like you went from everyone watching just a handful of channels to now having access to all these individual creators on YouTube. And I think we're seeing that same momentum swing, where you're going to have fewer people reading, the outdoors and that sort of these large publications, and reading individual creators and maybe even athletes themselves, which is amazing. So I'd say that's just happening across all verticals and industries. So that's a wave that we're just sort of all caught in, and probably there's nothing we could do to change it, even if we wanted to. In terms of the US versus international, for me at the Ultra Minute, I very much have a US centric perspective, but that's primarily because that's what I'm exposed to and have enough insight into to feel comfortable writing about, and at some point you have to make a curation decision. So I've sort of decided to lean into my perspective as a US based content creator. That being said, I'm very much interested in learning more about the international scene. I don't know that much, nor do I really know how to learn more. But I'm not even a year into writing the Ultra Minute, so I sort of feel like if I look back to my knowledge of the sport 1 year ago, I know so much more than I did, but I still know so little. But if I look forward another year, I suspect my experience and knowledge will grow more on the international scene too, and I'll start to naturally cover more
For
of
sure.
that side of the sport too. But I've thought about trying to partner with someone based internationally to either supplement the Ultra Minute, to add their voice and perspective, or maybe even to do like an international version of the Ultra Minute or something like that. Maybe it will just naturally happen and someone else will do it. There is like a New Zealand, is it New Zealand? Yeah, New Zealand based Substack that's very thorough. It's more like the Ultra Hour. It's like,
Didn't know that.
I don't know the creator's name offhand, but I've read a few issues and they're so lengthy. It's kind of incredible. I'm like,
check
there
it
must
out.
be more than one person working on this. But
I'll
yeah,
check it
so I
out.
think
Very
hopefully we'll see
interesting.
more of that happen, especially as, maybe the other thing that's interesting is Substack, YouTube, these are American based companies. And so I wonder how much influence that has as well. Like, is Substack kind of in the zeitgeist internationally? I really have no insight into that. Whereas here, it's like if someone says Substack, I think at this point people are familiar with the term.
Not everybody is familiar with Substack for sure. Here, not as many people as they are familiar with YouTube or Instagram for sure.
Right. Yeah.
But it's starting to be a thing. So
Yeah.
yeah,
It's actually
we're always catching
interesting.
up with the Americans
You
on
brought up
this.
the language barrier, and I think I remember you talking about this before on a podcast. I don't remember which one, or maybe it was on your Substack. But as a fan of yours, I've also experienced this where sometimes your Substack will be in Italian, and sometimes I'll try to translate some stuff, and like you just had a video on YouTube called "Going Farther," I think,
Yeah,
that I watched with
about
the
canyons.
YouTube auto-generated captions, which works pretty well.
I actually
Um,
put some effort into translating and the captions.
oh, you
So
did? I
yeah,
assumed they were auto-generated. Okay,
yeah.
interesting.
So I hope that worked.
It
But
worked very well for me.
okay,
The only challenge for me is a
but
lot of
yeah,
times when I'm consuming this type of content, it's like I'm running with the stroller with my kids or something. So it's hard for me to actually watch a lot of content. So I tend to listen.
listen.
So if it's captions, obviously I have to like sit down and but yeah, great video. But that must be so challenging. Like you have to kind of make that decision. Am I going to be like Italian first or English
Exactly.
first? And it seems like you kind of do it from post to post.
Yeah, I don't know. It's more like a decision that is made on the moment.
Right.
um, yeah, I do know that I have an international audience, especially on Instagram, so I tend to write in English. But
Hmm.
some thoughts and some conversations just feel way more spontaneous in Italian. So
Sure.
yeah, generally when I'm thinking about trail running, my mind is processing information in English because
Hmm.
I don't know, English is my second language, but it's almost like a native language. So I can, I don't need to translate in my mind my
Right.
thoughts. My thoughts are in English, in proper English.
Cool.
um, but yeah, I feel like some like other thoughts belong to my Italian personality and language, so they're more natural for me to
Yeah,
express
that makes
in my
sense.
native language. But yeah, it is for sure an issue that I face sometimes. Yeah. Another question that I wanted to ask you is, there is so much to cover, and you've quickly learned that the length of the newsletter can easily grow from
Oh
an
yeah.
8 to 10 minute read to a 20 more minute read. So
Yeah.
you have to focus on certain stories and decide not to cover other stories, obviously, or not go as deep into
Yeah.
some of these stories, as you quickly realize, for example, after the Canyon interview. Um, how do you choose your stories, and also where do you generally get your information? Like, what actual media do you follow?
Um, Great question. It's like everything else, constant evolution. I started in terms of sourcing. I think after the first issue of Tom, I spent maybe a week curating my sources, I guess. So I put together like an RSS group, with, gosh, maybe 100 sources or something like that.
Oh wow.
Yeah, I should probably post that somewhere. People might find it interesting. It's basically lots of different websites that talk about trail or ultra running. And I spent a lot of time curating my Instagram. The funny thing there is I did all that on my personal Instagram, and then I later started a Ultraminute Instagram, and so I've been trying to catch up because it's kind of time consuming to flip back and forth between them. So I'd say that the two biggest sources are probably my RSS feeds and Instagram. I'd say the number one source is Instagram, just because even if people post a YouTube video or a Substack, they almost always post about it on Instagram.
Obviously.
The problem with Instagram is it's so time consuming because it generates this feeling of, oh, I need to scroll it one more time to make sure I didn't miss something. And it's like my worst
Yeah,
fear
the FOMO
is,
is there for sure.
Yeah, like my worst fear is that I published and then I like missed like the biggest news story of the week or something like that. Which even if that happened, right, the world's not going to fall apart. But it generates this feeling in me where I feel like I constantly have to reach for my phone one more time to scroll really quickly, and then the format is also frustrating because there's so many distractions where it tries to get me off task. So it'll show me like the threads carousel and stories, and it's just so easy to go down a rabbit hole there. So frustratingly, Instagram is my biggest source. I wish it wasn't, but it just sort of is where everyone is still, and everything by default gets posted there. But I also spend a lot of time on YouTube, and so sort of both all of my social feeds, really, Twitter, Threads, I'm on Blue Sky a little bit. They're all just very ultra running centric, and that the nature of all of these feeds is, they're machine learning based. So it feeds you more of what it thinks you want to see. And if I'm looking at a bunch of ultra running stuff, it's going to show me more ultra running stuff. So I've sort of learned to use that structure to my advantage as much as I can. But because of the endless scroll, yeah, it creates like a bad feeling, I would say, overall. I wish there was just like a checklist. Okay, I've got everything. So I just try to time box it. And then in terms of what I find interesting and how that process works, I'm just sort of following my own interest. And I always try to think back to like, okay, 1 year ago, when I was a fan of the sport, then what would I find interesting? And that's a hard exercise, but that's sort of my guiding principle, is making a publication that I myself would find interesting. So typically it sort of, the decisions are pretty easy to make. Sometimes probably the most challenging is deciding what race I want to feature. Like when I started, it was more like, oh, what race should I feature, each week? Because I sort of do like one featured race, one result, and then I do like an additional results section. And as I've learned more about the sport and just gained more confidence, now I just kind of like, it's like I read through my notes when I'm compiling the newsletter, and it's like, okay, this is the story that I think is most interesting, or that I find most interesting, and go with that, or that I think more people should get exposure to. So like I did Stephanie Case last week, and being in the weeds as a fan now, I felt like it got a lot of coverage, but thinking back to a year ago following the sport, I don't think I would have seen that story. So, that was a natural or an obvious decision. Oh, I'm going to feature this story. I think it's an amazing story. There were other great results that week that I could have featured, but that story just spoke to me. And I, having seen my wife give birth 3 times and knowing how challenging that is, and especially that phase right after birth, seeing what Stephanie did running and nursing, and it's just amazing. And it had come back to the sport. That really resonated with me personally, and just wanted to share that. So really, it's just kind of, I sort of write the newsletter for myself, essentially. And that's really the only decision. And then in terms of the content and people I follow, again, it just comes down to like who I personally am interested to learn more about, and kind of what the algorithm is putting in front of me. And also, I'd be remiss to not point out Substack. I spend a lot of time on Substack. I'm subscribed to like 300 Substacks or something crazy. I don't obviously read all of them, but I get the notifications for all of them, and then I kind of will browse it and go like, oh, do I actually want to sit down and read this? I also use the audio feature in Substack a lot. So you can like, they'll have like a voiceover where you can play it, and I kind of listen to Substack as if it's a podcast. It's not a great experience, but it helps because I could put it on like 1.5x and kind of get through stuff. So I do a lot of that. So I'm kind of all over the place. But yeah, in terms of stack order, it's probably like Instagram, RSS, YouTube, Substack, something like that.
Yeah, it's hard to be a fan of the sport. And I hope with your project, you're making it simpler for people to.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, in one way, it's kind of fun to bounce between one source and another.
Yeah.
In another way, sometimes I wish there was just a website or like a reference where I could turn to get
as a
results
fan
and read.
of the sport, and as a person who'd like to spend less time online, if I wasn't writing the Ultra Minute, I would love to just go all in on Substack and not spend any time on Instagram. I'd probably still
Hmm.
be on YouTube, but I'd love to just be able to get off Instagram completely.
Yeah. Yeah. Probably the place where I still get, like, besides Instagram and yeah, Substack probably, but my main reference as a website probably remains Iron4 because
Oh
with
yeah, yeah.
the
I
the weekly
read Iron4 all the
running
time.
um,
Yep,
column, that is a great place to get results and just
yep.
stay updated
I
with
also really like
what is going
Atra.
on.
Atra
Yeah.
has a lot of great content. So in terms of publications I read, yeah, I Run Far and Atra are probably the two most
Hmm.
visited. They're also just so quick with,
Yeah,
it's like
that's it.
2 hours after a race, they've got something up. And I don't know how they do that. I mean, they're professional publications, but yeah, that blows my mind. Like, as someone who's putting content out there, it's like, my goodness, I could never turn it around so quickly.
What stories are being told well in the sport right now, and what do you think is missing?
Mm, that's a really good question. Um, I think the stories at the front of the field are being told pretty well. If you think about the big podcasts and most of the YouTube videos, a lot of it is about the front runners, which makes sense. I think the competitive side of the sport is going to attract the most people. As a fan of the sport, I'd love to see more coverage for up and comers. Sort of who's the next wave, next generation of the sport. Um, I sort of take notes whenever I can, but I feel like personally I'm still learning the sport so much it's kind of difficult for me to identify. I think I'll get better at that over time, and it's something I have pinned as a project potentially to start to highlight up and comers more. But yeah, I'd love that. The other thing would be East Coast trail running. I think there's a lot of great races there that I'd love to see get the free trail single track style coverage. And there's a couple of podcasts that are starting to cover that space that I have my eye on. East Coast Ultra Running and Roots Running. So we'll see how that develops. But yeah, I think there's so many stories on that side of the country too that currently we're not really getting. The same holds true for international coverage. If there and there may be, I just may not know who to follow or listen to. But yeah, I'd say number one for me though is up and comers in the sport.
Yeah. And have you ever thought about telling your own stories and not just um, writing a review of what's happening? Not that, like, for example, for Canyons or for other races, you've obviously put out original content that you created, but most of your work is a review of
Mhm.
what's already been published. Do you plan to expand more in that direction? Or
I'm very
how do you
interested in it.
see? Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that was maybe one of the reasons I started to put more energy into the sort of feature race write up is just this. I'm not sure how to describe it, but this feeling of not wanting to just be a curator, but also wanting to provide some sort of original reporting or insight into the sport. Um, and I think I went too far in that direction. Like, I'd say probably the thing that I'm most proud of so far, though, is I did a little mini profile on Hans Troyer in January or February before Black Canyon. And I had a lot of fun doing that. And I thought it was one of the better feature pieces I've done. It's the only non race feature write up I've done. So I'd love to do more of that. But it also took me away from the curation piece. And I think when people subscribe to the Ultra Minute, the number one thing they're looking for is a succinct review of the sport. So I don't want to lose that, and
Yeah,
I
you
don't
have
want
to
to
stay true to
undervalue
your
it.
goal. Yeah.
Yeah, so I think as long as I can do it in a way where both personally I can do it sustainably and not burn out, I'm very interested in that. It's just a matter of balancing that with the primary value that the ultra minute brings. So we'll see. It's something I'd like to experiment with. I think I'll probably do more of the mini profile type thing where I chat with an athlete, listen to a bunch of podcasts that they've done, that sort of thing, and then try to share my own perspective on their story. And this is kind of what I meant earlier when I said I penned this down, but I'm interested in doing this in particular for up and coming athletes because I think I'm in a good position to help people learn the next names in the sport. I think already there's a lot of content out there to learn who the existing top athletes are, but there's not a lot to know. Like, okay, these are the names to sort of have your eye on. And I find as a fan of the sport, it's always helpful to learn people's story, rather than just seeing the race result. But
for sure,
if I can do that in a quick way, which I think is challenging, but I felt like I did a good job of that with Hans. So try to capture more of that.
Yeah, that could be the starting point for new fans to learn something about a new athlete, and then they just follow their journey and become their fans.
Yeah,
which is great.
And I'd love to spend more time like on the ground in person at events, and I'm sure I'll
Have you ever done that?
So many more stories, but I haven't done that. And right now, with where I'm at in life with my kids, I can't justify it. But next year, I've already talked to my wife about it. I want to travel to some of the bigger races and both experience it as a fan, but also see if I can tell the story from a different perspective.
Yeah. As an observer of the sport through the ultra minute, are there any particular trends that you're noticing in trail ultra running, not just from a media perspective, but as a sport in general? Like, how do you see the sport evolving?
There's a lot of interest in sub ultra. Maybe it's just me personally, but seeing what Golden Trail is doing and the traction that they're getting. And speaking of Matt Walsh, he had a great write up about their sort of deal. It's Warner Brothers, I think, is going to be covering them. So also when you think of live streams, which live streaming is also gaining more traction. I think what Mountain Outpost is doing here in the US has been huge. And I think they get better every race. So, Cocodona was an incredible experience as a spectator. That's obviously not sub ultra, but it's like the far end of the spectrum. I just consumed the Sunapee Canyon, not Sunapee Canyon. What is it?
Sunapee Scramble.
And
US mountain running champs.
Yeah, and that was, even though the feed itself, the video feed wasn't great, the commentary was great, the chat was great, and the time was amazing. As a dad, 3 kids, and I think that's your average fan. You can't justify sitting around for 24 hours to watch a race, but for a couple of hours, that's like a typical sport. So I think it's more spectator friendly. So I think we're going to see a lot more interest. Also, just as an everyday runner, it's much easier to go out and run a sub ultra race, not competitively. I know it's just as hard running fast short distances, but I can train and be competent and finish a half marathon distance trail race versus going and doing a 50 miler or something like that. And more importantly, I can turn around and be there and be present for my kids an hour later. So for me, it's like, the past year I've done a few races, all sub ultra, and it's been amazing because I can just go out and do it. And it's like going out for a Sunday long run and coming home and spending the day with my kids and go play with them and not have my legs beat up or anything like that. So that's certainly a trend, I think. And then related to that, maybe more opportunities for collegiate athletes to become a professional in the trail scene. I think what Andy Wacker's done with the trail team is really interesting. So I've been watching that, and I'd love to see more happen along that front. I'm not super informed on why more collegiate athletes don't target trail racing, but as a spectator on the fringe, it seems like more are starting to become aware that that's a path that has potential.
That's very true.
And it
Yeah.
seems like there's more brands investing in athletes in the trail space. So maybe there's a little bit more financial opportunity than there was in the past. So I'm hopeful we'll see more storylines where we see more top collegiate athletes making the move directly to trail versus going track and field or road and then later in their career trying trail. I say that, but at the same time, I'm super excited to see Des Linden transitioning to ultra running.
I am too. Yeah. Yeah, that's a good observation. Also because I feel like the entry level for professional trail running is currently much lower than road running or track, just because it's so competitive. And
Mm-hmm.
it's not that trail running is not competitive. Obviously, it is, but not
Not to the
still not
same
at that
degree.
level, not to the same degree.
Yeah.
There's just not the same density.
Yeah.
And trail running is not just one event. There is a lot that you can do. You can run very long races. You can run sub ultras, 50Ks, 100Ks, and there's
Right.
just a lot of room for athletes to get involved and do it seriously. So
Yeah.
yeah, I would also encourage young, promising athletes to give this trail running thing a real shot for their career. Yeah. Um, cool. I think I wanted to ask you a final thought
Yeah. Go for
on
it.
independent journalism versus um, brand driven content in trail running, and also like, yeah, independent creators, there is a lot of that versus um, brand driven content. um, I feel like we're going towards, for example, on YouTube, or yeah, especially YouTube, I think, where we're seeing athletes starting their channels and working with brands, proposing new projects where the brand is blended in organically, instead of, the brand going to the athlete and proposing a project and then making a documentary or a film. Um, what is your thought on that, and how do you see this evolution?
Yeah. I just listened to the latest Long Run Archives episode, single track podcast. And maybe it was the latest episode. Maybe it was one before that. I don't remember actually. Anyway, I think what Finn Melanson's doing is a really good example, but I remember him having a line where he says something like, it's in reference to Unbreakable 2, I believe. But essentially, my takeaway was he has two things, both going in, capturing, not necessarily with a predefined story, because he doesn't want to impose that on the athlete, and you just don't know, there's so many things that can happen, but more just going in open minded to capture what unfolds, and then after we're putting together a story. I think that makes a lot of sense. And then related to the brand side, I think his brand partnerships are, they financially support his ability to put the film together. They produce the film, but I don't believe they are defining the goals or objectives for the film. I don't know what level of input they have, but it seems minimal.
Yeah,
And
agree.
that seems like a pretty good standard. So I think he's probably going to help set an example for most creators. I
Yeah,
think sustainably that feels better as a creator, probably, where you have more creative freedom versus you're just creating something on behalf of a brand.
totally. Yeah, I the only thing is that I see Finn and Single Track not as an athlete, but as a media, as a
Mm-hmm.
content creator.
Yeah.
So obviously for professional athletes, that's a little different. And I feel like sometimes the connection with the brand that is sponsoring them for these kind of projects is still a little bit difficult, like not as easy as as someone could imagine
Yep.
from the outside.
I would say,
Speaking from personal experience and also like talking to other athletes.
obviously, I haven't been in that position. I don't have all the answers, but my instinct is, if you look at the type of content that gets the most traction, now there are some great brand created, brand centric documentaries in the ultra running space in particular, but
Yeah.
I think if you look at the stuff that's getting the most traction and the stuff that gets the most long-term like subscribers, so there's a difference between views and then someone who actually subscribes and wants to consume more of that content. I think individual creators who tell the story they want to tell generate more subscribers, even if the views aren't as high, which long term is more important than a high view count and will lead to higher view counts. So I think the smart move for a savvy brand is to understand that and just empower the athlete to create the content they want.
Exactly.
And that probably looks something like providing the finances as well as the tools and professional partnerships to enable that sort of storytelling. That being said, there's also a challenge I recognize of athletes are athletes first and content creators second, so I don't know how many athletes, and I'm sure it differs from athlete to athlete, want to even think about creating content or telling stories.
It's not for everybody, obviously, but there are definitely some athletes who are interested in exploring this type of projects and or are there and just waiting for the right people to help
actually,
them.
Thinking about like the next generation actually comes to mind, like Ali Ostrander and like Hans Troyer, Dan Green. They're all just creating their own content,
exactly.
And Hans actually, he's like wearing Ultra's gear, but he's not changed his YouTube channel at all. And I don't know if you've seen his latest video, but it cracked me up because the intro is like sitting down with Jim Walmsley, but meeting him for a Western because that's like his hero. But then of course Jim's not there. So it's pretty funny. Anyway, those are maybe good examples, and maybe that generation just naturally, understands how to make content and they're interested in making it. It's not uniform across that generation, but I think those are good examples that come to mind. And as they gain sponsorship, the sponsors just empower them to do more of that by primarily providing for them financially and just enabling them to kind of follow their own interests.
Totally. And I think from a marketing perspective for the brand is also a great investment because they get a lot of value in return, and it feels very authentic and organic.
Totally.
Contrary
I mean, thinking about Hans, like, showing off his Ultra shoes or, whatever. It's like, oh, okay, now I'm getting exposure to that product and I didn't even know that product was a thing.
Contrary to, a shoe review or like paying an influencer to advertise some gear. Yeah. So I think this is a trend that I'm also noticing, and I'm glad you kind of confirm my thought.
For sure.
Thanks. I think that's everything I wanted to ask you for today. Obviously, people can find you at the Ultra Minute on Substack, on Instagram, elsewhere.
Yep. What's up?
Elsewhere.
Those are the two primary places. I'm on Threads as well and Blue Sky, but not really active there. Just post auto-generated stuff primarily and consume content there. But yeah, I post weekly on Substack, ultraminute.substack.com, and on Instagram at the Ultra Minute. And the Instagram is kind of like the real Ultra Minute, where it's actually consumed in a minute, and then the Substack is like the Ultra 10 Minute, I would say.
Awesome. And yeah, hopefully your project will grow and more people will support you.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me, Fran, and
Of course.
thanks for the support. It's been really encouraging. You sent me a DM like last September, October, or something like that, with some encouraging words on the project. And
Glad I
on those
did.
like late nights, it's I've thought back to that many times. So thanks again for the early support and encouragement. And good luck with the rest of your season.
Thanks.
You've had an amazing season so far. So I hope it
Hope to
continues.
keep that up. Yeah.
Yeah.
Good luck for everything, and thanks for having me here today.
Yeah. Thank you.